They said forgetting was protection, but what if forgetting was the first sign they found you? These aren't just stories, they're warnings dressed as whispers, and you've already heard too much. The knock came gently, 3 soft raps that barely stirred the air. It was just past 3 in the morning, and the world outside her window was frozen in that still, breathless way it gets deep into the night. Her name was Melissa. She lived alone on the outskirts of a small Oregon town, tucked between quiet forest and empty pasture. The night before, she had filmed something that still made her fingers tremble when she thought about it. A light, hovering above the tree line, silent. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a star, and it wasn't like anything she had ever seen. She'd recorded it for a little over 3 minutes before it suddenly zipped upward, vanishing like a flicked spark. Then she went inside, locked the doors, and tried to sleep. She never uploaded the video, never told anyone, not even her sister, but somehow they knew. When she opened the door, 2 men were standing there, identical black suits, matching hats, pale skin like wax paper under a dim porch light. Neither smiled, neither blinked. One held something in his gloved hand, a folder. The other tilted his head and asked if they could come inside. She said no, but still, she stepped back. They didn't walk like regular people. Their feet made no sound on the wooden floor. They sat at her kitchen table and opened the folder without a word. Inside was a printout of a single still frame from her video, the exact moment the light blinked out. She hadn't shared it. Not online, not even to the cloud. Melissa asked who they were. They didn't answer. Instead, one of them spoke softly. "Do you believe what you saw?" She hesitated, then nodded. The man with the folder slid it back toward her. "You won't remember this clearly. That's the mercy." Then they both stood up. Chairs scraped backward, but the sound felt wrong, like it came a second too late. They were at the door before she could think of another question. She followed them onto the porch. But the night was empty. No footsteps, no sound of an engine starting, nothing but mist curling over the gravel path like it was trying to cover their tracks. The next morning, she found the folder still on her kitchen table. But when she opened it, the photo was gone. In its place was a blank sheet of paper and a small, hand-typed note on old yellowed cardstock. It said, "Thank you for your cooperation." That was 10 years ago. Melissa never filmed the sky again. Suits in the snow don't usually make sense. Not out there. Not in that kind of cold. The technician's name was Henry, and he worked alone at a small relay station perched on the edge of nowhere, half buried in the Canadian wilderness, somewhere between Fort Chipuyan and Silence. Snow had fallen all night, thick, dry powder. Nothing stirred. He had been logging some strange signal fluctuations, odd pulses in the VLF range. They weren't just interference. They had rhythm. He even joked once to himself that it sounded like breathing. But he didn't report it. Not yet. He was still trying to rule out equipment faults. Then came the knock. There was no road to the station, just a frozen trail reachable by snowmobile or helicopter. But the men standing outside his door didn't look like they'd used either. They wore thin black suits and long coats. No hats, no gloves, no breath, no frostbite. And Henry swore no footprints in the snow behind them. They asked to come inside. Not forcefully, just certain. One of them spoke while the other stared. The one who spoke never gave a name, never blinked. He asked Henry if he had been transmitting signals not approved by the Department of Communications. Henry told them no, which was true. He hadn't transmitted anything. Then the man asked him why, on the morning of January 4th, he had made a backup copy of his data logs and stored them on an external drive hidden behind the microwave. That detail turned Henry cold. He hadn't told anyone about that. No one could have seen it. And yet here they were, speaking about it like they had written the script. The other man finally moved. He walked over to the equipment racks and placed one pale hand on the signal receiver. It stopped humming. Just went dead. The screens blinked. A low buzz filled the room for a moment, like pressure in your ears before a storm. "We are maintaining balance," the first one said. "You are not in violation, but curiosity invites revision." They both turned to leave. Henry followed them to the door. The snow outside was still fresh, untouched. Not a single mark, no prints, no crushed powder, just the same flat whiteness that had fallen all night. But when he looked down at the doorstep, he saw something strange, tiny droplets of water, perfect circles, not splashed, not melted, just dots. By the time he looked up again, the men were gone. He never saw them leave. He never heard a door open, but the room felt emptier than before. The silence rang louder. His equipment flickered back to life on its own. Logs resumed. Everything appeared normal, except the entire morning's data had been erased. Not just deleted, unrecoverable. Henry stayed another 6 months before he quit. Moved south, never touched a receiver again. He still dreams of the snow, and the suits. And that voice telling him revision was mercy. The sun had just slipped behind the ridge when he took the shot. Daniel was hiking alone in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, chasing light with an old camera he'd inherited from his grandfather. The air was thin and cold, the snow crusted under his boots, and the sky above was turning molten with late evening color. He had just set up his tripod when he saw it, an oval-shaped object, matte black, hovering without a sound near the tree line. It wasn't moving. It wasn't blinking. It just hung there. He only got one photo before it vanished. No flash, no warning. It didn't fly away, it just wasn't there anymore. That night, back at his cabin, Daniel developed the film himself. He watched the image appear like a ghost out of the chemicals. There it was. Not a smudge, not lens flare. A solid, clear shape, crisp edges, sharp shadow beneath it. He stared at it for hours. He told no one. Not at first. 3 days later, they came. It was just after dusk when he heard the knock, 3 sharp taps, like knuckles on hollow wood. 2 men stood on the porch, identical in appearance. Thin, pale, perfectly still. Black suits, black ties, black shoes with no snow on them. They said they were with a federal aerial monitoring division. They did not show ID. One of them said his name was Mr. Green, which felt like a joke. Daniel invited them in. He didn't know why. They didn't ask where the photo was. They told him, "It is in the drawer beside the sink." "In the envelope labeled June," said the one who hadn't spoken yet. His voice was flat, like it had never learned emotion. Mr. Green reached into his coat and pulled out a small white card. On it, typed in a narrow font, were just 8 words. "Surrender the negative," or "surrender your direction." Daniel asked what that meant. The men only stared. He refused. He told them it was his property, that he had rights. The second man tilted his head, almost bird-like, then whispered something Daniel couldn't quite understand, except for the last word. Unfortunate. They walked out without another sound. No threat, no warning, just absence. That night, all his backups vanished. The hard drive wouldn't spin. The scanned copies on his laptop were scrambled, reduced to gray static. The envelope with the negative was still there, but inside it was empty. Just air and that same white card, now torn diagonally through the center. Weeks later, Daniel started waking up with the feeling of something pressed against his chest. Always the same time, 3:18 in the morning. No dreams, just a sound in his head like whispering through a fan. He moved, changed his name, never picked up a camera again. The mountains still call to him in his sleep. But now, when he dreams of them, there are no ridges, no trees, just black sky and 2 men, standing very still, waiting to see what he'll choose next. The house was old, tucked deep in the Maine woods where the fog rolled in like breath over glass. Claire and Tom had moved there to find peace, a quieter life for them and their son, Jamie. He was 6, bright, imaginative, and always talking to the trees. On the morning it happened, the sky was low and silver, and the radio kept cutting out with static that didn't belong. They were in the kitchen when Jamie called out from the living room. "There's people at the door," he said. Claire looked through the window but saw nothing. Tom stepped to the front and opened it. No one was there. Just the porch and the woods and that fog, curling around the trees like it was listening. Jamie stood still near the couch, staring. When Claire asked who he saw, he said, "Two men. They wanted to ask me questions." "What kind of questions?" "They asked what I saw last night." Tom's heart dropped. Jamie had mentioned lights in the sky the night before. 3 of them. Red, then white, then gone. Claire had laughed it off. Now she wasn't laughing. Jamie said the men were wearing black hats, black suits, no smiles. They didn't come in, and he hadn't opened the door, but he said they talked to him anyway. Stood just outside the glass and stared until he heard them inside his head. "They didn't blink," Jamie whispered. "Not even once." Claire called the police. They found nothing. No prints, no tire marks, no signs of visitors at all. But the officer who came in later mentioned something odd. The security camera on the porch had shut off between 3:17 and 3:22. 5 minutes. Black screen. Then back again. Like someone had pulled the plug from inside a dream. That night, Jamie didn't sleep. He sat upright in bed with his eyes wide open and his mouth closed tight, as if afraid that breathing too loud might invite them back. At one point, Claire walked past his door and saw him smiling to no one. When she asked why, he said, "They're still watching. They don't want me to forget." Claire checked the porch camera footage again the next morning. Those 5 minutes were still missing. But now there was something new right before the camera went dark. A flicker of movement. 2 shapes in frame. Both tall, both still, both facing the camera. One lifted its hand. That's when the feed cut. They never spoke of it again. Not to neighbors, not to friends. Tom erased the footage. Claire threw out the camera. But Jamie? He started drawing them in his notebook. Always in black. Always near trees. Always watching. And never blinking. The file wasn't supposed to be seen. It lived inside a gray envelope stamped with a red classification code no longer in use. It was tucked between reports on Soviet signal jamming and Cuban informant logistics. What made it different was that it didn't reference a country, or a weapon, or even a time zone. It referenced silence, Project Silence, to be exact. No official designation, no operational badge, just a heading, bold, uppercase, and slightly blurred on the photocopy. The document, declassified in the late 2000 teens, had only a few surviving pages. Most had been redacted, but what remained was strange enough. It spoke of deniable contractors, not agents, not operatives, outsiders, individuals used for civilian contact suppression in cases of unapproved exposure to anomalous aerial phenomena. Not sightings, not even encounters, exposure. The language was cold, technical, but the subtext bled through. One section described a protocol called mirror reinstatement. Its purpose? To interrupt belief. To encourage memory revision through applied fear stimuli. The targets were often rural, isolated, chosen not by rank or threat, but by how loud they talked. A field report from 1962 described a woman in Utah who had taken photographs of a metallic sphere in silent descent. 3 days later, she was visited by 2 gentlemen with badges from an unnamed department. The report stated she no longer possessed the images, nor the camera, and expressed confusion regarding her initial claims. She had mailed the negatives to a cousin before the visit. That cousin died in a fire 2 weeks later. Another line, half faded, referenced extreme behavioral uniformity among suppression contractors. It suggested that either they were highly trained or not entirely normal. One analyst wrote in the margin, "No emotion markers, scripted speech, possibly pharmaceutical conditioning, possibly not pharmaceutical." The last intact paragraph described a meeting between an Air Force intelligence officer and an unnamed consultant. The consultant claimed external cooperation had been secured, and delivery methods were no longer limited by traditional transportation constraints. And maybe, the officer asked what that meant. The consultant replied, "They arrive when remembered." That line stayed with the archivist who found it. She later wrote in her personal notes that during the weeks she handled the documents, her phone would ring at exactly 3:13 in the morning. No one ever spoke on the other end, just static, soft, constant, and just beneath hearing, like something you feel more than hear. She stopped reviewing the files shortly after. And Project Silence? It was never referenced again in public records. No budget, no location, no names, only fragments in unrelated files, mentions in footnotes, and the occasional whistleblower who speaks in riddles. But the phrase keeps appearing, always out of place, always near things that weren't supposed to happen. Project Silence, not a cover-up, a correction. It started with the feeling of being watched, not paranoia, just a subtle pressure, like someone standing behind you in a quiet room. Dr. Elena Voss had been working at a small observatory just outside Tonopah, Nevada. She wasn't studying stars, she was studying sound, ultra-low frequency hums that pulsed through the desert at odd intervals. She had 3 PhDs, 2 dead laptops, and one growing suspicion that what she was hearing wasn't natural. Then the van showed up. It was black, matte finish, no plates, no markings. It parked across the dirt road from the observatory, just after dusk. No one ever got out. No one ever went in. The windows were dark, like obsidian. At first, she thought it was local law enforcement, but after 3 nights, that excuse wore thin. After 7, it started to feel like a threat. Every time she looked out her window, it was there, just sitting. She tried to take a photo. Her phone froze. Tried again. Blank screen. Her camera worked fine indoors, but every image taken through the glass came out corrupted, twisted with pink noise and digital static. Then came the dreams. She began waking at precisely 3:21 each morning, heart racing, ears ringing. In the dreams, she was standing in the desert with her back to the van. She never turned around, and something was always whispering her name. By the 2nd week, she called the sheriff. They sent a deputy. The deputy arrived an hour later. The van was gone. No tire tracks, no disturbed dust, just a smooth patch of dirt like nothing had ever parked there. He looked at her like she'd wasted his time. She offered to show him the security footage from the observatory's cameras. They showed nothing, where the van should have been just flickering shadows, a static line rolling through the image like an old VHS tape. The deputy suggested she was working too hard, that she needed sleep, that maybe she'd just imagined it. That night, it came back. But this time, the driver's side door was cracked open. Elena didn't sleep. She sat on the floor with her back to the wall, holding her research notes like they might protect her. At dawn, she stepped outside. The van was still there, but when she looked directly at it, her vision shimmered, like heat waves on asphalt. Her ears rang. The skin on her arms turned cold. She blinked, and it was gone. No sound, no motion, just absence. She left Nevada that same day, packed everything into her car and drove without stopping until she crossed into Utah. She didn't look in the rearview mirror once. Weeks later, a letter arrived at her temporary address. No return stamp. Inside was a single photo, an aerial view of the observatory, dated the day before she called the sheriff. A black van, parked across the road. On the back of the photo, in small, typewritten font, it read, "You're not being watched. You're being remembered." It was supposed to be a joke. That's how Ron told it, half laughing, beer in hand, holding court behind the counter of his comic shop in downtown Wichita. He'd seen something a week earlier, driving home on a back road after closing late. A bright disk, hovering low above the fields, pulsing with a soft green light. It moved against the wind, then blinked out like a dead bulb. He never stopped the car, just stared, swallowed hard, and drove faster. He didn't tell anyone right away. Not until the following Friday night, during a lull between customers and debate over which issue of X-Men had the best cover. He slipped it in like a punchline. Everyone laughed. Ron did too. Except he kept looking toward the windows after that, like something might be looking back. The next night, the bell above the shop door didn't ring. It just opened. 2 men walked in. Suits, pale skin, black ties. They didn't browse, didn't glance at the shelves. They walked straight to the counter and stopped. Ron said later that they looked too still, like they were holding their breath beneath their skin. One of them reached into his coat and pulled out a small card. No name, no title, just 3 words printed in sharp black type. Why you spoke. Ron blinked, tried to laugh it off. You guys here for Area 51 subscriptions? They didn't laugh. One of them leaned in closer and whispered something. Ron couldn't remember the words later, only that they made his mouth go dry and his ears ring. The lights in the store flickered once. The radio behind the counter let out a burst of static, even though it wasn't turned on. The taller one placed a folded slip of paper on the glass counter. It looked old, like it had been carried too long. When Ron opened it, he found a photocopy of his driver's license, only the photo was wrong. In the image, he wasn't smiling. He looked terrified, and behind him, barely in frame, stood a black shape with 2 glowing eyes. He looked up. They were gone. No footsteps, no doorbell, just silence. The shop was empty. Ron locked up early that night. Didn't answer his phone. He tried to explain it to friends later, but the story came out messy, like it didn't want to be told. The photo? Gone by morning. The slip of paper had turned blank, but he kept the card. He keeps it in a drawer under the register, next to a flashlight and a pack of matches. Sometimes he takes it out and just stares at those 3 words. Why you spoke. He doesn't tell the story anymore, not even as a joke, especially not as a joke, because now, when he laughs, it always feels like someone is listening, waiting to see if he'll do it again. The night was slow. Rain tapped against the diner's windows like fingers too impatient to knock. Melissa had worked the midnight shift long enough to know which customers were trouble and which ones just needed coffee and silence. But when the door opened just past 1 in the morning, she felt it in her teeth before she saw them. A pressure, a stillness, like the world held its breath. 2 men walked in, tall, black suits, black hats, but not like government agents. There was something off, too smooth, too still. Their faces were pale, almost translucent, like candle wax. Their eyes didn't blink, not once, and they were hairless, not shaved. Just born that way. They sat at the booth in the corner without saying a word. Melissa approached, pen ready. She tried to smile, tried to joke. Long drive tonight? She asked. No answer. She looked down to write their order, but realized they hadn't given one. Still, 2 empty mugs sat in front of them. She didn't remember putting them there, didn't hear them ask. But the coffee was already pouring itself from the pot in her hand. She asked again, "Anything else?" One of them turned his head, slow as rust, and said, "The signal ended here." His voice wasn't right. It was flat, as if spoken from memory, like someone pretending to be a person. The other man stared out the rain-blurred window, lips unmoving. Melissa stepped back, tried not to shake. She asked them to clarify, heart pounding now, skin cold. The first man tilted his head. "You spoke of lights, last week, behind the building," and suddenly, she remembered. A joke she'd made to a regular named Kenny about the weird lights she'd seen hovering over the woods out back. They'd laughed, said maybe aliens liked pie. She never told anyone else. The second man finally spoke. Pie. His mouth didn't match the word. Melissa stumbled back, nearly dropped the pot. The men stood, perfectly in sync. One reached into his coat, not quickly, not threatening, just precise. He pulled out a napkin, folded, pressed flat. When they left, The bell above the door didn't chime. The lights in the diner flickered. The radio behind the counter hissed, then died. She opened the napkin. Inside was a drawing not printed, not sketched, burned, a scorch mark in the shape of the diner. Viewed from above, a tiny figure stood behind the building, and above it, 3 circles in a triangle formation. She never slept right after that, not for weeks, and no matter how many times she washed her hands, they always smelled faintly like ozone after a storm. She never saw the men again, but sometimes, when it rains, the bell rings with no one there, and the coffee brews itself. The first thing he noticed was that he couldn't move, not his arms, not his legs, not even his eyes. It was like being trapped inside his own skin. But he'd known that feeling before. Sleep paralysis. It had haunted him since he came back from deployment in the late 1990s. Usually, it passed after a few moments, a nightmare clinging to the edge of sleep. But this time, it felt different, because he wasn't alone. He could see the room in strange clarity, the dim shape of the dresser, the moonlight curling around the curtain, and then 3 shadows, not floating, not vague, solid, tall, standing at the edges of his bed, one near his feet, one by his left shoulder, one at the door. They wore black suits, perfectly pressed. Their faces were smooth, too smooth like they had been sculpted, not born. No hair, no expression, just pale masks over stillness. He wanted to scream, but his throat was locked. Wanted to close his eyes, but they wouldn't shut. His breath stuttered in his chest, shallow and strained. Then they spoke, all 3, at once, in perfect rhythm. "You will forget." Their mouths didn't move. The voice didn't come from them. It came from inside his head. Not like a thought, but like a memory being pressed into him. A voice that knew what fear sounded like and used it as punctuation. "You will forget." He tried to turn his head. Couldn't. Tried to blink. Nothing. The one near the door leaned closer. Its eyes were blank. Not white, not black, just blank, like the idea of an eye before it's painted on. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying his terror. And then, without warning, they moved. Not step by step, from one place to another. The one near the foot of the bed was suddenly inches from his face. He didn't see it happen. There was no motion, just change, like they existed in still frames and the universe had skipped ahead. "You will forget." He felt pressure in his skull, like something prying memories loose from the inside. He tried to focus on the name of his daughter, her laugh, her favorite toy. But it all began to blur, edges softening, details washing away like paint in the rain. And then, gone, he gasped awake. No shadows, no men, no whisper, but his pillow was wet with sweat. He looked at the clock, 3:17. He got out of bed and wrote everything down. Names, faces, what they said, drew sketches in the margins. He did this every time it happened, and it had happened before. But in the morning, the pages were always blank, not torn out, not burned, just empty, like the memories had never existed. But the fear remained, and some nights, when he closes his eyes, he can still feel them leaning in, hear the soft chorus just beneath the silence. "You will forget." Angela didn't scare easily. She'd been a medium for over 20 years, had heard things that made grown skeptics cry, and seen things that medicine could not explain. But this was different. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a spirit. It was something else, something that didn't belong here. Her client was a quiet man named Russell, early 40s. Wore buttoned shirts and spoke like he was afraid of wasting words. He said he'd been seeing lights above his farm. Said he'd blacked out for hours at a time. Said he woke up once in the middle of his field, barefoot, with the soles of his feet clean and dry. Angela figured he needed grounding, something calming. But when she opened her senses during their first session, everything went wrong. She didn't hear whispers. She heard static. It wasn't just in her ears, it was behind her eyes, buzzing, scraping, dense and wrong, Russell was staring straight ahead, lips twitching like he was mouthing something silently. Then, he stopped, looked right at her, and said something with his mouth closed. Her ears didn't hear it, but her dog, Dozer, who'd been sleeping under the table, shot up and growled, a low, feral sound she'd never heard from him before. He backed into the corner, tail tucked, teeth bared at Russell. Then, Russell repeated the phrase again. Angela still couldn't hear it, but Dozer yelped and bolted down the hallway, scratching the wood floor as he ran. She told Russell the session was over. He left without protest. But the moment he stepped outside, every dog in the neighborhood started barking. Not howling, barking. Furious, urgent, like they were warning the world. The next day, Angela reviewed the audio recording she always kept during client sessions. There was no voice, just a strange pulse. A clicking rhythm too fast to be mechanical, too precise to be random. It repeated every 13 seconds. She counted. Exactly 13. She called a friend at the university, a sound engineer. He ran a frequency scan. There was something embedded in the static, a signal in the ultrasonic range, too high for human hearing. He played it back for her through a special converter, and when he did, the lights flickered. The screen went black, and his dog started whining behind the door. Angela deleted the file, burned the backup drive, but she didn't forget the phrase, because she started dreaming it. She didn't hear it in her sleep. She saw it, as symbols burned across the inside of her eyelids, like language before language, like thought dressed up as noise. She never saw Russell again. But one night, about a month later, she was walking Dozer near the edge of the woods. The air was still. The trees didn't move. Then, from the dark between the branches, came the same pulse. Dozer froze. Then, slowly Saturday, then tilted his head and began to whimper. Angela turned, and standing at the tree line was a man in a black suit, pale and unmoving. No sound, no greeting, just presence. And Dozer? He whispered the phrase, word for word. Dogs don't speak, but something spoke through him. The library was quiet that day. Not just the usual hush of books and whispers, but something deeper, a stillness that made the air feel heavier. Catherine, who worked the afternoon desk, remembered the moment he walked in because the lights flickered, just slightly, and the automatic door lagged before closing behind him. He was tall, dressed in a perfect black suit, no coat, though it was raining outside, no umbrella either. His shoes left no wet prints. He didn't speak. Not to her, not to anyone. He didn't check out a book, didn't ask for a terminal, just walked slowly through the aisles like he was looking for something that had never been shelved. But wherever he went, people left, quietly, uneasily. Children stopped laughing. Readers shifted uncomfortably. One man dropped his book and left the building without picking it up. Catherine remembered how her computer froze the moment he passed her desk. Just for a second, the screen glitched, then returned to normal, but all her tabs were gone. He stood for a long time near the microfilm archives. Just stood, no motion, no turning of pages. When a janitor named Theo finally approached him near closing time, Theo stumbled back after just a single whispered word from the man. He never said what that word was. Theo quit 2 days later. The security footage should have helped. But when the IT tech pulled the recordings, every angle the man passed through was corrupted. Not blank, not erased, just wrong. Skewed colors. Time looping. Catherine's own face looked blurred when he was near, but the timestamp was clear. 3:23 p.m. Exactly 13 minutes after he entered, the man walked into the back corner where the emergency exit was. That door had been locked for weeks due to construction. Yet somehow, when staff checked later, the latch had been disengaged from the inside. He never came back, but everyone who saw him remembered something different. One patron insisted the man had green eyes, glowing faintly. Another swore he had none at all, just smooth skin where the sockets should be. A child whispered to her mother that the man smelled like winter, like something dead under the snow. Catherine began dreaming of books she'd never read, pages filled with symbols she couldn't translate. Every night, the same dream. She stands at the front desk, and the man in black is at the far end of the aisle. He lifts one hand, and all the shelves collapse inward. 1 month later, a new book appeared in the system. No record of who cataloged it, no barcode. Its spine read only one word: witness. It had no author. Inside, the pages were blank, except for the very last one. In faded ink, it read, "You were in the presence of memory." The book vanished after 1 day. No one saw who took it. But when Catherine checked the surveillance footage again, the screen flickered. And there he was, standing behind her, watching the camera. It took nearly 2 years for the documents to arrive. The Freedom of Information Act request had been filed by a retired science teacher from Dayton who'd once seen something strange in the sky while walking his dog near Wright-Patterson. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He didn't chase flying saucers. But he'd never forgotten the way the air had shimmered that night, like heat rising off asphalt, except it was winter. The envelope was thicker than expected. Hundreds of pages, mostly black bars, entire paragraphs redacted. But a pattern emerged in the repetition. The phrase, "memory alteration units," appeared 12 times. Always capitalized, never explained, no context, just floating in the ruins of deleted information. One entry, dated early June of 1961, referenced an unauthorized visual acquisition by civilian youth. The file included a hand-drawn map of a field just outside the base perimeter. The youth, unnamed, reportedly described 3 men in dark formal wear, approaching him and instructing him to forget the object he had seen descend. No aircraft was listed as active in that airspace. Another file, from March of 1973, mentioned a containment failure during what was only described as non-human cognitive interface testing. A redacted location within Wright-Patterson was circled in ink. The summary noted the following: 2 contractors experienced retrograde memory collapse within 24 hours, consistent with MAU protocol thresholds. There was no explanation of what MAU meant, but a separate page badly scanned and misaligned contained what looked like a training directive for verbal suppression field deployment. It listed 6 bullet points, though 5 were fully redacted. The only visible item read, "Witnesses under prolonged exposure to Class C anomalies may develop false memory substitution within 48 hours. In cases of resistance, deploy MAUs under blackout authority." The final segment was handwritten. It wasn't an official memo. It was tucked between pages, barely legible, as if someone had included it by mistake or on purpose. It read, "I saw them once. I was working late in Sector 7, and the lights flickered. They came through the wall, not like a ghost, but like a shadow unfolding. 3 of them. Black suits, smooth skin, no eyes, or too many. They didn't speak out loud, but they told me to stop asking questions. I filed a report the next day. They said there was no Sector 7. 3 days later, I couldn't remember my mother's face. I can't remember it now." And then, at the very bottom, a series of numbers. One of the archivists tried calling the number embedded in the code. The line connected. A voice answered. No greeting, just one sentence. "You will sleep through the end." Then the line went dead. No trace of the call, no record of the number. And that science teacher from Dayton? He disappeared a week later. His house was left unlocked. His laptop was wiped clean. But in the trash outside, beneath torn grocery bags and an old shoe, was a single, unmarked envelope. Inside was 1 page. No signature, just 2 words. "Still watching." The community center was half full that Thursday night. The usual mix of curious first-timers, retired veterans, and UFO obsessives filled the folding chairs, while a local investigator gave a PowerPoint presentation on a triangular craft spotted near Red Bluff. People listened politely, Asked the same questions as always about propulsion, about lights, about government denial. And then came the joke. A man in the second row, balding, middle-aged, wire-rimmed glasses, raised his hand, said he'd like to lighten the mood. The investigator gave him a nod. "So," the man said, "a man in black walks into a diner and orders a battery with a side of static." A few people chuckled. Someone groaned. Then came a sound from the back row. It was laughter, but not like a normal laugh. It started loud, too loud and sharp. Then it pitched up like a recording played at the wrong speed. Everyone turned. The man sitting in the very last seat, dressed in a black suit and dark sunglasses despite the flickering fluorescent lights, had his head tilted slightly upward, mouth open in a perfect, unmoving grin. But the sound kept coming, a burst of cackling, followed by stuttered noise like a record skipping. The room went quiet except for that laugh, wrong in tone, wrong in rhythm, mechanical, choked. As if the person had learned laughter by watching 100 movies and tried doing it all at once. The man in the second row, the one who told the joke, stopped smiling. "Sir, are you all right?" someone asked. The laughter stopped instantly. The man in black lowered his head and turned slightly toward the voice. He didn't answer. He didn't blink. The investigator, an Air Force veteran with 3 decades of radar tracking under his belt, said later that in that moment, he felt the same pressure he once felt during live nuclear drills. A kind of silence that hums under your skin. Everyone in the room felt it, like the air had thickened. Then, the man in black stood up. His movement was smooth, too smooth, like a marionette with invisible strings. No weight in the motion, just action without cause. He walked slowly up the aisle toward the exit, his face emotionless, arms straight at his sides. Someone muttered, "Is that guy with the feds?" The man stopped, turned his head slightly toward the voice, then continued walking. No one followed. After the meeting, the staff checked the sign-in sheet. There was no name that matched the man's description, no record of a registration, no car in the parking lot that anyone remembered seeing him exit. The camera in the back corner of the room had been on the whole time, pointed right at the seats. But when the footage was reviewed, there was no one sitting in the last row, just an empty chair, for the entire meeting, except one strange flicker exactly at the moment the joke was told. A distortion, a shimmer, a brief disruption in the shape of a figure that never belonged. The man in black didn't laugh. Something wearing his face did. The first time Eliza saw them, she thought they were mannequins. She was 12. Her older brother had taken her to a remote field in the Nevada desert, where strange lights had been seen for weeks. He had binoculars, a notebook, and a camera with fresh film. She just had a flashlight and a growing sense of unease. The lights did come. They danced above the hills in slow arcs, pulsing blue and white, but silent. No hum, no wind, just silence, like the sky was holding its breath. Then, 2 men arrived. They didn't drive in. There was no engine, no crunch of gravel. They were just there, standing at the edge of the field, wearing black suits that somehow didn't wrinkle or move with the breeze. Their ties hung too straight. Their hands stayed perfectly still at their sides. No blinking, no shifting weight. Eliza remembers her brother nudging her and whispering, "We didn't see a car." The men didn't come closer. They didn't wave or speak. But she remembers the way their heads turned exactly together, perfectly synced as if they shared a single thought. One of them raised a hand, slow and deliberate. Her flashlight died. The camera jammed, and when they looked back, the men were gone. Years later, Eliza joined an online forum for UFO experiencers. She posted a description. Within hours, she got 6 private messages from people who'd seen the exact same men, different towns, different decades, same suits, same stillness, same missing features. One woman from Kansas described shaking hands with one of them after being questioned in her living room. She said the skin was cold, waxy. She noticed his fingernails were missing, not trimmed, absent, smooth as porcelain. She made an excuse to get a glass of water, slipped into the bathroom, and called her husband from her cell phone. When she returned, the man was gone. No door opened, no sound, just gone. Another man from Wales described making eye contact with one of them outside a factory fence. The face was pale, symmetrical, but wrong, too smooth. No hair on the head, no eyelashes, no eyebrows. The skin didn't crease when he smiled, it stretched. A retired detective in Oregon reported a bizarre incident where one such man entered his office and placed a file on the desk. The man never removed his gloves, but when he left, the detective checked the doorknob out of habit. No fingerprints, not even a smudge. Forensics found no trace that anyone had touched the surface. One common detail stood out across all reports: the scent. Witnesses described a smell like hot electronics or melted plastic, or sometimes nothing at all, an absence of smell where there should have been something, like the air didn't know what to do. Eliza's last message on the forum was cryptic. She said someone had knocked on her door 3 times in the middle of the night. No one was outside, just a small black envelope taped to the glass. Inside was a single, glossy photograph. Her and her brother in that desert field, but taken from behind the men. From their point of view, the boy's name was Lucas. He was 8 years old, quiet, often lost in thought, always drawing. His teacher said he had a gift for detail far beyond his age. While other kids sketched superheroes or spaceships, Lucas filled his notebooks with faces that looked too real, too still. It started when his parents moved into an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Price, Utah. Nothing special, just creaky floors, dry wind, and too much space between neighbors. The first night, Lucas told his mother there were men outside his window. She thought he was dreaming. But the second night, he said they were closer. By the third, he was drawing them. His mother found the sketches while cleaning his room. 3 figures in every image. All wore black suits, white shirts, dark ties, no faces, just pale ovals. In some drawings, they stood outside the house. In others, inside his room. One had a hand on Lucas's shoulder. When asked why he drew them, Lucas simply said, "Because they watch me sleep." Disturbed, his parents contacted a child psychologist. The woman asked Lucas to draw the men again during their session. He did, fast, without pausing. When she asked where their faces were, he said, "They're not supposed to have any." The psychologist, concerned it was more than just imagination, passed the drawings along to a friend, a part-time investigator who'd once looked into abduction claims. He agreed to take a look. 2 days later, he drove out to the farmhouse. He never made it. His wife found his car parked outside a gas station an hour north. The keys were still in the ignition, the door wide open. Inside the car, on the passenger seat, was a manila envelope containing Lucas's drawings, but the pages were blank. No ink, no pencil marks, just the indentations of once drawn lines, like the graphite had vanished. The investigator was never found. Lucas stopped drawing for a while. Then one morning, his mother found a new picture under his pillow. It was their house viewed from above, as if from the sky. In the yard stood 3 small figures, barely more than shadows. The sky above them wasn't blue. It was black, and inside it was a spiral. His parents didn't call the police. They called MUFON. A field agent came out, reviewed the history, took the remaining drawings, promised to get back in touch. He never did. Weeks passed. Then one morning, Lucas was gone. No broken windows, no doors open, no struggle. Just a cool breeze, a quiet room, and a single drawing taped to the wall. 3 men in black, standing under a spiral sky, smiling. Marissa had taken the same elevator every day for 3 years. It was old, slow, and smelled faintly of cleaning solution, but it worked. That morning, she stepped in with a coffee in hand, headed to the 13th floor of her downtown Chicago office building. The doors closed with a sigh, and the hum of machinery began. Then it stopped. Not with a jolt, not with a bang, just silence. The kind that makes your ears feel like they're waiting for something. She pressed the emergency button. No response. Pressed the floor buttons again. Nothing lit up. That's when she noticed she wasn't alone. At the far end of the elevator stood a man. She hadn't seen him get in. He hadn't made a sound. He was wearing a black suit, old-fashioned in cut. His tie was perfectly knotted. His shoes didn't have a speck of dust. He held a small briefcase in one hand and stared straight ahead. Not at her, just ahead. Marissa cleared her throat and said, "Looks like we're stuck." The man didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't shift his weight. He just stared, his face a mask. Pale, smooth, too smooth. Something about him didn't register right. His proportions were off. The length of his arms, the angle of his shoulders subtly wrong, like a mannequin molded from memory rather than reality. She backed into the corner, pressing the emergency button again and again. The elevator didn't budge. No one answered. Time passed. Her watch had stopped. Her phone had no signal. The digital floor indicator above the door was blank. Still, the man stood motionless. Marissa began to feel lightheaded. The air wasn't thin, but it wasn't right either. Heavy. Still. Like the inside of a sealed jar. She asked the man again if he was all right. He blinked. Once. And then smiled. It wasn't a human smile. There were too many teeth. The corners of his mouth pulled back too far. And behind that grin, his eyes never changed. No warmth. No amusement. Just a blank stare dressed in a smile someone had taught him. He spoke a single word, so quietly she barely heard it. "Remember." Then the lights flickered. She closed her eyes, panic rising, ready to scream. And then the doors slid open. Sunlight poured in. People walked past, chatting, sipping coffee. The lobby was alive and normal. She stumbled out, gasping. A security guard asked if she was okay. Said the elevator had only been out for a few minutes. Said no one else had reported being stuck. When she looked back, the elevator was empty. No sign of the man. She later checked the building's security footage. It showed her entering the elevator alone. No one else on camera. No man. No briefcase. Nothing. Except, in one frame, there was a flicker half a second of static and something tall and dark standing in the corner. Something that stared directly at the lens. They found the notebooks hidden inside a gutted radio console in a farmhouse attic near Sandia Base. The researcher who once lived there had vanished decades earlier, scrubbed from every academic record, every defense roster, every archived directory. But the paper remained. 3 spiral-bound notebooks, leather covers cracked with time, every page hand-labeled and dated in neat blue ink. No name, just numbers. The first entry was from early spring, 1956. It began with radio silence. The researcher never identified, only referred to in recovered CIA memos as Subject Orion, had been tracking unexplained bursts of narrowband frequencies on classified channels. At first, they assumed Soviet interference. But then the bursts began to speak, not in words, in patterns. Bursts that responded to pulses he sent back. Like call and response but delayed, as if whatever was on the other side was deciding how human to sound. Then, just pages later, the tone of the notebook shifted. The handwriting changed. It became faster, uneven, sloppy even. One phrase appeared over and over in the margins. "They know when you read." The entries described experiments unauthorized on brainwave induction, microwaves, pulse modulation, units designed to disrupt memory consolidation. Devices small enough to carry in a briefcase, aimed at witnesses, journalists, even field agents. One page described a test at an airbase in Ohio. A pilot reported a disc-shaped object over the runway. A team was dispatched, not to investigate, but to make him forget. A suitcase was opened in the back of a sedan. A tone was activated. 10 minutes later, the pilot couldn't remember what city he was in. In the back of the third notebook, scrawled in heavy black ink, were phrases that repeated, descending into something like madness. They erased the eraser. No one leaves Project Silence. Black suits, black eyes. They're not protecting us. The most disturbing entry wasn't about the aliens. It was about the men. Orion had begun documenting visitations, not just being followed, not just being watched, but confronted, interviewed, sometimes in his own dreams. He described a figure in a suit, standing at the foot of his bed, never blinking, always smiling, asking questions with no voice. Did you write about the transmission? Who else saw it? Would you like it erased? The final page of the notebook was half torn, the ink smeared, as if wet with sweat or tears. There were 2 words only, repeated over and over in trembling handwriting. Still listening. The house was abandoned not long after. Every record of Orion's employment, clearance level, and publications vanished by 1961. And yet those notebooks were real. The pages analyzed, the paper dated, the handwriting matched samples from classified clearance requests stored on microfilm. He existed, and he was erased. But he left a warning. Still listening. The cassette was unmarked except for a small sticker on the spine faded yellow with the word confessional written in block letters. It was found in a shoebox of tapes donated to a college radio archive in upstate New York. Among interviews with local musicians and politicians, this one stood out. The voice on the tape was strained, low, like a man who hadn't slept in days. He didn't give a name, just started talking. Said he used to work maintenance at an airfield in New Mexico. Said one night he saw something descend, not crash land, smooth, deliberate. He described lights that didn't blink, shapes that didn't cast shadows, a craft that didn't make a sound, even as it hovered over the runway. And then he whispered, they weren't inside it. They were behind it, waiting. The student who cataloged the tape didn't think much of it. He labeled it and played it during a midnight segment on Local Mysteries. By morning, he hadn't slept. By the end of the week, he was hospitalized for hallucinations and paranoia. He kept muttering one phrase in his sleep. They're listening through the silence. Soon after, listeners began calling in, not about the story but about what happened after. They said the silence between the man's words felt wrong, like something else was inside it, breathing, clicking, mimicking. One listener claimed her dog began growling at the speakers whenever she played it. Another said her radio shut off by itself the second time she tried. A trucker from Pennsylvania reported driving into a fog that wasn't there before, only after playing the tape through his cab. The radio station pulled the recording, but not before a local journalist requested a copy. She was writing a piece on alien contact, compiling interviews from across the state. She played the tape alone in her apartment. Her neighbors heard the screaming. When paramedics broke down the door, she was curled in the corner, clutching the cassette, eyes wide open, whispering the word, again, over and over. Her recorder had melted from the inside. She never spoke a full sentence again. The tape was confiscated first by campus security, then by men in suits. No ID, no explanation. The station was told it was a matter of national security. A formal silence followed, but one intern kept a bootleg copy. He mailed it to an archivist in Vermont, hoping for answers. The package arrived. The tape inside played fine, but by then, the archivist's voicemail was already full of frantic messages from strangers who said they saw something outside his cabin. Something tall, thin, wearing a suit that didn't wrinkle, eyes that didn't move. The archivist's last message was to his sister. He just said, "I think I heard it breathe." Then silence. No one knows where the tape is now. Maybe it's buried in a box. Maybe it's playing on loop somewhere no one should hear it. But those who did never forget the sound. Not the voice, not the words, the silence between them. He was a systems analyst, quiet, average, nothing unusual except for what he saw on a Wednesday evening while driving home from his job in Langley. A flash of light above the trees, a craft shaped like a boomerang, and then just silence. The car died. The clock froze. When it started again, it was nearly midnight. He'd lost 4 hours. He told no one. Not until a week later, When two men in black suits came to his apartment, they didn't show badges, they didn't knock twice. One of them placed a black envelope on his kitchen table. The envelope had no name, just the seal of a department he didn't recognize. Not CIA, not NSA, something older. The paper was warm to the touch. Inside was a letter typed on thick, off-white cardstock. It contained only one paragraph. You are instructed to relocate, effective immediately. Transportation and documents have been prepared. Do not speak of what you saw. Failure to comply will result in reassignment. No signature, no return address. Beneath the letter was a second envelope. Inside, a passport under a name he didn't recognize, a plane ticket to a remote island in the Pacific, and a debit card with no bank branding. He tried to ask questions. The men didn't answer. One of them simply said, "The world keeps spinning when people vanish. Decide who you want to be." Then they left. He waited 48 hours, watched his building, noticed the man with a newspaper who never turned the page, the delivery van that never delivered anything, the silence from his phone whenever he tried to call out. On the third morning, he packed one bag and boarded the flight. He used the passport. No one blinked. The island was not on most maps. It was small, humid, overgrown, an airstrip carved into jungle, a single facility near the shore. Others were already there, men and women with the same hollow eyes. Some had accents. Some didn't speak at all. They worked. They followed orders. They avoided the fence. No one talked about the sky. No one mentioned what they had seen. There were rumors that this was a holding ground for those who saw too much, that they were kept from the world, not to protect it, but to protect something else, that some who left never aged, that some who stayed heard voices in the tide. He never sent letters home, never used his real name again. Time passed strangely. No clocks, no calendars, just shifts and silence. Then, one morning, his bunk was empty. No bag, no footprints. Just the black envelope again, resting on the pillow. Inside, the same letter. But this time, one sentence had been added at the bottom. You were never here. It always starts the same way. A flicker in the lights, a buzz in the walls, and a smell, sharp, metallic, burnt, but not smoke. Ozone. The kind of smell that rolls in before a lightning strike or after a transformer blows. People report it right before the visit, right before everything changes. In a small suburb outside of Columbus, a woman had just sat down to dinner. Her husband was in the other room watching television. The dog, usually silent, began to whine and scratch at the back door. Then the lights dimmed, not all the way out, just enough to cast shadows in the corners. She stood, thinking it was just a storm. But the sky was clear. The air inside the house began to feel thick, like something invisible had moved in with them. That's when she smelled it, like a spark gone sour. The hairs on her arms stood straight up. She walked to the living room. The television was off. Her husband sat staring at the screen, motionless. His mouth was slightly open. His fingers twitched every few seconds. She asked what was wrong. He didn't answer. A knock came at the door. Not hard. Just 3 slow, deliberate raps. The kind that made the dishes in the cabinet tremble. She opened it. 2 men in black suits stood there. Pale skin, no emotion. One wore sunglasses even though it was nearly dark outside. The other smiled too wide. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't ask for permission. They stepped inside. The smell grew stronger. The lights flickered again. Her husband finally blinked. The spell broke. He stood up and said nothing, just stared at the men. She noticed he was sweating, his shirt sticking to his back. One of the visitors pulled a photograph from his coat. It was of the woman, standing outside her house. Only it wasn't from that day, it was from that morning, taken from across the street. She hadn't seen anyone out there. They asked one question. Did you speak about the sky? She said no. They stared at her, not blinking, not breathing, just waiting. Then, without a word, they turned and left. The smell lingered for hours. She tried to tell her sister. The phone wouldn't work. It buzzed with static every time she picked it up. That night, the smell came back. No one knocked. She didn't sleep. Reports of the same pattern spanned decades. Always the smell of ozone. Always just before or after the appearance of men who aren't quite men. One scientist tried to study it. He rigged his lab with air sensors, waiting for an encounter. It came. Cameras failed. Computers shut down. But the sensors caught something: spikes in ionization, the same found during electrical storms or inside high-voltage labs. But there was no storm, no source, only the visit. And when he tried to publish the results, he received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sentence, typed in all caps: "The air is not yours to study." He moved 3 weeks later. Left no forwarding address. The smell, some say, is a signature. Not of them, but of where they've been, or what they are. Like something follows them through the veil, bleeding through the seams of reality. Electricity in the air, memory in the dust. And if you ever smell it burnt, sharp, heavy, don't answer the door. She noticed the buttons first. It was at a coffee shop in Lower Manhattan, sometime in early spring. Rain clung to the windows and the place smelled like burnt espresso and damp coats. The man who walked in didn't order anything. He just stood near the back, unmoving, a black briefcase in one hand. She wouldn't have noticed him if she hadn't dropped her phone. When she bent down to pick it up, her eyes passed over the edge of his jacket. At first glance, it was just a black suit, crisp, unwrinkled. But something about the way it hung, too perfect, too still, felt unnatural. And then her gaze landed on the buttons. There were no threads, no holes, no seams. Each button was perfectly round, perfectly smooth, and somehow embedded directly into the fabric, not sewn, not snapped, fused, like part of the suit had grown around them. She blinked, looked again. The man hadn't moved. She was a designer, trained. She had studied fashion from the early French ateliers to synthetic blends made in Japanese labs. She could tell a machine stitch from a hand-rolled hemline from across a room. But this suit? It was wrong. She followed the lines of the jacket upward, no lapel stitch, no shoulder seams, not even a zipper or a fold, just a continuous, matte black surface that clung to the form like a second skin. Even the collar sat too still, like it wasn't made to move. The man turned. His face was pale, expressionless, lips thin, eyes too dark. She looked away immediately. When she glanced back, he was gone. That night, she sketched what she remembered, tried to recreate the pattern, but no matter how many times she drew it, the structure made no sense. You couldn't tailor a suit like that, not with human hands, not with fabric and thread. She became obsessed. She called contacts in Milan and Paris, asked about experimental materials, invisible stitching, hidden fasteners. But no one knew what she was talking about. One retired tailor told her, quietly, "I saw one once, in 1969. I still have dreams about it." She laughed. He didn't. She stopped working for a while. Started researching reports of men in black descriptions, photos, sketches. The deeper she looked, the more patterns she saw. All of them wore suits that defied explanation, too perfect, untouched by rain, uncreased after hours of movement. No labels, no tags. One photograph, supposedly taken in the 1970s, showed a man walking past a store window. She zoomed in. The suit was identical to the one she saw that day. Same collar, same flat buttons, same impossible cut. She printed it out, taped it to her wall. 2 nights later, the printer turned on by itself. It printed nothing, just ran out of paper. When she checked the tray, there was only one sheet left, blank. Except in the center, someone or something had scrawled 5 words in faint gray ink. Not made for your hands. She burned her sketches the next morning, but she never stopped looking at buttons. It was a rainy night in northern New Jersey, the kind that makes the world feel slower, like the clouds are pressing down just enough to hush the roads. Emily and her brother had just left their aunt's house. They were heading home along a winding stretch of highway that snaked through pine forests and empty parking lots. That's when they saw it. A black car. Sleek. Old but not aged. No plates. It pulled onto the road ahead of them from a side street with no headlights. Just merged into traffic like it had been waiting for them. Emily noticed first. "That car," she whispered. It didn't signal. Neither of them spoke for a while. The rain fell harder. Then, something stranger. The car began drifting left, then right. Not sharply, gently, like it was dancing with the lines. But it never corrected. It never jerked back into place like a nervous driver would. Just swayed. That's when Emily leaned forward in her seat. "The driver's not moving." Her brother squinted. The cabin light from the dashboard barely revealed anything, but it was enough. The man inside sat stiff as a mannequin, hands on the wheel, but not turning it. The car was steering itself, or being steered by something else. They followed for a mile, then two. No signals, no brake lights, just motion. Too smooth, too quiet. When the road curved sharply around an old quarry, the black car didn't slow, didn't adjust. It glided around the turn without any change in posture. No lean, no shift of weight in the cabin. The figure behind the wheel didn't so much as blink. Emily pulled out her phone, tried to take a picture. The screen flickered, froze, then shut off completely. Her brother tapped the brakes, let the car slow until the black sedan drifted farther ahead. But at the next red light, they caught up. And that's when it turned to look at them. Not the driver, the car itself. That's how it felt. The brake lights pulsed once, not red, blue-white. Like lightning behind tinted glass, the driver's head turned, slowly, unnaturally. No eyes, just a smooth, pale face behind the windshield. Like a wax figure half-finished. The mouth moved, but there was no sound. Then the light turned green. The black car didn't move. Not right away. It waited. Waited until Emily and her brother edged forward. Then, without revving, without a sound, it pulled away. Not fast. Just gone. By the time they reached the next hill, the road ahead was empty. They checked side streets, driveways, ditches. Nothing. That stretch of highway? It was straight for at least another mile. No turns, no exits, no place to hide. The next day, her brother filed a report with the local police, just in case. They told him there'd been similar calls over the years. Always the same description, always the same kind of car. When he asked if anyone had ever stopped it, the officer shrugged. "They don't stop," he said. "They vanish." That night, the streetlight outside Emily's house flickered, and a car engine started with no one inside. It was a winter evening in Colorado Springs when the knock came. Not loud, not rushed. 3 soft taps. Colonel David Ellison, retired United States Air Force, opened the door and found 2 men standing there. Both wore identical black coats, black ties, black fedoras. They introduced themselves with names that didn't stick, names that felt like placeholders. They asked if he had a moment to speak. He did not. But somehow, he stepped aside and let them in. He had seen strange things in his career. Lights over missile silos, objects that moved in silence across radar screens, shapes that changed direction without acceleration. But the strangest thing about those encounters wasn't what he saw. It was how he felt during them, as though something outside of time had looked back at him. That's what the men in black wanted to know. Not the color of the craft, not the flight path, not the altitude or trajectory, but the feeling. That's the word they used. Again and again. What did you feel? They didn't ask if he was scared. They didn't ask if he believed. They asked if he recognized it. Recognized. As if what he had seen had not been new but remembered. He said he felt disoriented. They wrote nothing down. He said he felt watched. They nodded slightly, as if that was expected. Then he said something he had never told anyone. That in the moment of the sighting, High over the Atlantic in the cockpit of a KC-135, he felt like something was speaking directly into his nervous system. No words, just intent, as if his body had heard something his ears had missed. Both men leaned forward at once. Did it feel familiar? That word again. Yes, he whispered. It did. They smiled, not kindly. The air in the room shifted. The smell of the fireplace vanished. It was replaced by something sterile and wrong, like hospital air filtered through static. One of the men asked him to close his eyes. For some reason, he did. The moment he did, the room changed. He could no longer feel the chair beneath him, could no longer hear the ticking of the wall clock. Just silence. Deep, oceanic silence. Then a question not spoken aloud, but carved into the inside of his skull. Do you remember before? He opened his eyes. The men were gone. The door still shut. The fire still burning. But the clock on the wall had stopped at exactly 9:17. It never worked again. 2 days later, he received a call from a number that wasn't listed. A voice, mechanical and genderless, simply said, "Forget the feeling. It isn't yours." Then, silence. He hung up and sat there for a long time. He's told this story only twice since, not because he fears being believed, but because sometimes, in his dreams, he still hears the question, not about what he saw, but about what saw him. It was buried in a forgotten frequency, not on any public band, not even the encrypted military channels that loop silently over oceans and deserts. This one pulsed once every 4 seconds, so faint it barely registered. But in late autumn, a retired signal analyst in Norway picked it up by accident. He had built his own receiver out of scrap and stubbornness, listening for patterns the world missed. That night, he found one. It began as a tone, then a stutter, then words, not spoken, synthesized. Project silence, directive final, stage 4 parameters accepted, comply with planetary intelligence continuity, memory vector suppression agents authorized, await signal burst vector. The message repeated once. Then the frequency went dead. At first, he thought it was nonsense, some experimental military test, maybe left over from the Cold War. But something about the phrasing itched the back of his mind. Continuity, suppression agents, planetary intelligence. He posted a cleaned-up audio file to a private forum of old intelligence techs. Most dismissed it. One didn't. The next morning, the forum was offline. By noon, his laptop had frozen permanently. By evening, he noticed the car. Black, unmarked, engine never running. It stayed parked across the narrow village road for 3 days. Then one night, it was just gone. The analyst never spoke publicly again, but someone saved the waveform. It was passed quietly through encrypted messages, burner drives, whispered meetups. Eventually, it made its way to a group of academic linguists in Wales. They confirmed it wasn't just English. Under the synthesized signal, there was something else layered in modulated tones, what one described as a non-human meta-pattern, not language as we know it, but a kind of conceptual resonance. Ideas carried without grammar, intent baked into sound. They didn't know what it meant, but it made several of them ill. One suffered seizures while sleeping. Another began sleepwalking and waking up outside. A third disappeared entirely. The remaining team deleted their work. But not before one of them, Dr. Kara Whittam, typed one final message to a colleague. It's not just observation, it's containment. Not of them, of us. That colleague, now working out of Buenos Aires, claims to have received a second broadcast weeks later. This one shorter. Final fragment executed. Phase completion. Global. Maintain veil. Intelligence must remain compartmentalized. They are not ready. He never shared the recording, because the moment it ended, all his files on 3 separate systems were erased simultaneously. He has since gone underground. What remains of Project Silence is only speculation now. Scraps of references in old CIA documents, blurred names on Air Force memos, traces in declassified black budget summaries. But the idea, persists, that there is something larger than nations, larger than our species, and that somewhere someone or something is making sure we never see too much of it all at once, not to protect us, but to preserve the experiment, one where the lab rats must never know they're in a maze. It was never meant to be found. The door to the basement was hidden behind a shelf of hymnals, the kind with faded covers and gold leaf lettering flaking off in your hands. The church itself sat on a bluff in northern Missouri, overlooking a field of rust-colored weeds and a sagging wire fence. No congregation had gathered there in years. The building was locked most days. But once a week, an old man still came by. He said he was the caretaker. No one asked more. He was not the original keeper. That man was Father Samuel Arnett. He died in the winter of 1994. No obituary, no headstone. Just gone. The next pastor arrived, a younger man, full of fire and talk of revivals. He lasted 3 months. Then the church closed quietly. Years passed. The weeds grew taller. And then, one night, a teenage boy broke in on a dare. He expected dust and shadows. What he found was a metal cabinet in the basement, secured by a rusted padlock and a chain. The lock broke easier than it should have. Inside were folders, hundreds, each one labeled with a name, a date, and 2 letters, CE, close encounter. Some had cassette tapes, others had Polaroids, others still drawings, scrawled confessions, medical scans. All of them spoke of lights in the sky, missing time, strange men in black cars, dreams that were not dreams, marks that did not fade, and one more thing, a signature. Witness received, case sealed, S.A. Father Samuel Arnett. The teenager brought one file to a UFO researcher in Kansas City. The researcher thought it was fake until he saw the handwriting matched letters from known abductees, real cases, unsolved ones. The next week, the researcher vanished. So did the file. But the boy remembered what he saw. One Polaroid stuck with him most. It showed a woman, maybe in her 40s, with short dark hair and a vacant expression. Behind her, blurry and just out of focus, stood a man, too tall, too still, wearing black. She had written one sentence on the back. He said I wasn't supposed to remember his voice, but I do, and it wasn't human. More files were discovered later, hidden in the walls, handwritten prayers asking for protection from the silent men. One testimony described a visit during Mass. He walked up the center aisle in the middle of service, but no one turned to see him but me. I felt like I was the only one awake. Another detailed a car parked outside the chapel every Sunday at midnight for 12 years straight, always empty, always running. In time, the church was bought by a historical society. They planned renovations, maybe even a museum, but nothing came of it. The workers quit. One by one, the blueprints were lost. Twice. The town went quiet about it. Now the chapel sits alone, its paint peeling and stained glass darkened by dust. But some say that every now and then, a single candle flickers inside, and if you approach the building after midnight, you might hear something below, a voice recorded on tape, asking questions no one should be able to answer. The night manager swore he checked every fuse twice. It was just past 2 in the morning when the first bulb blew room 203. A soft pop, then silence, followed by the slow, wavering hum of every fluorescent in the hallway dying one by one. The front desk lights dimmed, flickered, and returned, but now they buzzed like angry hornets. Room 203 had been occupied by a single man, checked in under a name that didn't match his ID, said he was passing through after a long drive from Arizona, kept to himself, never asked for towels. The maid said his room smelled like ozone and copper, like rain before it falls. The night before the bulbs blew, the guest came to the desk looking pale, distracted. He asked if the hotel had a generator. The manager said yes. Why? The man didn't answer. He just nodded and went back upstairs, whispering something under his breath the manager couldn't quite catch. That same night, the security cameras went dark from midnight to 3:07. The footage just cut. When it resumed, every monitor showed static for 6 more minutes before returning to normal. The hotel was old, but not ancient. Electrical surges happened, but not like this. Not room by room, not with screams. The next morning, the guest was gone, left no checkout, no key, just a wet towel folded neatly on the foot of the bed. The manager entered the room and felt a pressure in his chest, like the air didn't want to let him in. Every light bulb in the ceiling had shattered, not broken, shattered inward, as if something had sucked the light out. And then, they arrived. 2 men, black suits, black hats, white shirts, no luggage. They didn't introduce themselves, just showed a badge, no agency listed, no names. They asked only one question. What did he say before he left? The manager stammered. Said he hadn't spoken to the man after check-in. They didn't blink. One of them tapped a finger on the desk rhythmically, like he was counting something silently. Then they walked through the hotel without waiting for permission. They didn't ask which room. They already knew. They spent exactly 13 minutes inside. When they came out, the room was dark again. Every bulb, even the new replacements, had burst. The maids refused to enter after that. The room stayed locked, still island. The security footage of the men? Corrupted. Only static and flickers of what looked like stretched faces, shapes not meant for the screen. The hotel never filed a report. The manager quit 2 weeks later, said his dreams had changed. Now, when the power goes out late at night, some of the guests say they hear footsteps in the hallway outside room 203. Slow, measured, and if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear a faint clicking sound like someone tapping their finger on the wall, waiting for an answer. It always came near the end, after the knock, after the questions that made no sense, spoken in voices too flat, too smooth, too rehearsed, after the stare that made the room feel too small and the air too thick. That's when they'd lean in close, too close, and whisper the same phrase. Don't you want to forget? Some said it felt like a suggestion. Others said it felt like a command. But it never sounded like a question. Not really. One man in Tennessee had been camping when he saw the lights. He said they were shaped like needles, weaving silently above the tree line. He watched for only a few seconds before they were gone. He thought nothing of it. Thought it was just military testing. Until 2 men came to his trailer the next morning. They didn't ask about the lights. They asked about dreams. They wanted to know if he had dreamed of a humming sound, if he had felt a presence near his tent. When he said no, they paused, turned to leave. Then one of them said it, just loud enough to be heard over the ticking of the clock. Don't you want to forget? He laughed it off until he realized he couldn't remember what day it was, or why his watch was set to a time zone he'd never been to. A nurse in Missouri said she heard it from a man with no eyebrows and skin like wax. He came into the emergency room asking for someone who didn't exist. When she said there was no one by that name, he just stood there, staring at the wall. Then, before he left, he turned his head slightly and said it soft, slow, like a lullaby being hummed through a vent. Don't you want to forget? She thought she had misheard. Until she looked in the break room mirror and found a smear of ash on her neck. She had no idea how it got there. Still doesn't. A boy in North Dakota drew a picture of the man who whispered to him outside his window. His parents found him the next morning, sitting on the porch, barefoot in the snow, staring at nothing. When they asked what happened, all he said was, "He wanted to help me forget." Over and over, across the country, the phrase appears in reports, diaries, interviews, different tones, different voices, always the same words, and always that same chill that follows. A researcher once tried to track the pattern. She mapped out timelines, sightings, recorded interviews, but after her 3rd visit from unannounced survey agents, she burned her notes. She didn't say why, just that they asked her what memory she valued most and then told her how easily it could be removed. Some think it's a threat, others believe it's a warning, or maybe it's mercy. Because some things are worse than not knowing. Some truths twist the mind, break it. Maybe the question is real. Maybe it's a kindness. A hand offered in the dark, asking gently if you'd like to drop the weight of what you've seen. Don't you want to forget? Some say yes, others wish they could. She noticed it just outside Amarillo, a black sedan in the rearview mirror, keeping pace. Nothing strange at first. Highways stretched long and empty through the plains. Cars came and went. But this one didn't. It didn't pass. It didn't fall back. It just stayed. Mile after mile, hour after hour, the same gleaming black shape clung to her shadow. She tried slowing down. It slowed too. She switched lanes. So did it. She pulled off for gas in Lubbock, watching in the side mirror as it drove past. No turn signal, no hesitation, just gone. She sighed, stretched, told herself it was nothing. But when she returned to the highway, there it was again. Same make, same model, same dark tint on the windows, but not the same plate. That was the first time she felt it, that crawling sense that something was wrong. She was sure the number had started with a B. Now, it started with a K. She shook her head, told herself she was tired. Texas was wide and flat and hot, and it did things to your mind. But then, somewhere past Abilene, she stopped at a diner. She ate slow, made conversation, stayed nearly an hour. When she walked back to her car, the black sedan was parked across the lot, facing her. Different plate again. Now it started with a Z. She walked over, pretended to tie her shoe near the rear bumper. No state, no screws, just smooth metal stamped with characters that shimmered ever so slightly in the sun like they hadn't been printed but projected. She backed away and got in her car. No tail this time, she thought. She took a back road, wound through tiny towns and faded gas stations, tried to lose herself in dust and distance. But near dusk, as the sun bled orange across the sky, she checked her mirror. It was there, not behind her, next to her, in the oncoming lane, matching speed, just close enough that she could almost see the driver. But the windows were too dark. She didn't sleep that night, drove through until El Paso, booked a motel, and parked under a light. In the morning, she asked the front desk clerk if he'd seen anything unusual. He nodded slowly, said, "That car was idling across the street all night. Didn't move once." She turned to look. It was gone, but a business card sat on her windshield. Blank, black, text burned into the surface like it had been cauterized. "Thank you for cooperating. She doesn't drive long stretches anymore. She flies when she can. But sometimes, on quiet roads near her home, she'll see it again. Not close, not obvious, just there, following, and when she looks at the plate, she doesn't try to read it. She's afraid this time it'll read her name." They never remember the conversation, not word for word, not even close, but they all remember how they felt. It starts the same way. A knock, a visit, a presence at the door that feels heavier than it should. Two men, or sometimes just one, in black suits that don't wrinkle, shoes that don't scuff, voices that don't quite echo right. The people who meet them often describe a chill, not in the room, but in their bones, like something deep inside knew to be afraid before their minds caught up. And then, nothing. They try to recall the conversation later, try to put together what was said, but the words are gone, like smoke slipping through fingers. Some say the men asked questions, others think they gave warnings, but the exact phrases vanish as soon as they're recalled. One woman tried to write it down as it happened. Later, she found the page covered in strange shapes. She didn't remember drawing shapes that made her nauseous just looking at them. One man, a trucker from Oregon, saw a light in the sky one night off Highway 97. He told his wife, told his brother, called the local paper. Then, days later, he stopped talking about it, wouldn't even admit it happened. When his brother asked why, he just said, "I had visitors, that's all." His hands trembled, his voice shook. But that's all he ever said. A teenager in Ohio described it differently. She said the memory came like a dream she didn't know she had. She'd been having night terrors, waking up, screaming, heart racing, soaked in sweat. Her parents took her to therapy. The therapist asked her to draw what scared her. She drew two men, tall and thin, standing in the hallway outside her bedroom. Her mother paled. Said she remembered answering the door late one night but couldn't recall who was there or why. The pattern is always the same, no details, just fear. Even the calmest among them, the ones who pride themselves on being logical, shake when they speak about it. One astrophysicist in Florida said he was visited after discussing anomalies in lunar radio data. He laughed it off at first, but when he tried to return to his notes, pages were missing. Audio recordings had hissed over. Hard drives wiped. The part he couldn't explain? He had security cameras. But those hours were gone, not blank missing, as if they were never recorded at all. He said, "I remember their faces, but not their eyes." He moved to another state 6 weeks later, and then there are those who don't even know they forgot. They only realize something is missing when someone else brings it up. An old friend reminds them of a story they once told about lights in the sky, or a strange visitor, and they blink, confused, like hearing your own voice in a language you don't remember learning. They may forget the visit, they may forget the threat, but they always remember the fear. It never fades. It just waits. He remembered the man who sold it to him. Gray beard, British accent, said he was clearing out his late brother's estate. The book looked old, but not ancient. 1970s maybe. No barcode, no publisher. Just a plain black cover with silver text that read, "Visitors Among Us, a Pattern of Control." The kind of title you shelve in the back next to fringe stuff, where only the curious or the bored go looking. It sat there for weeks. Then one afternoon, a college kid bought it. Didn't ask questions, just paid cash, nodded politely, and left. A week later, they came in, 2 men in black, one tall, one taller. They wore the kind of suits you don't see in stores anymore. Crisp, narrow-lapelled, with fabric that didn't quite reflect the light right. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine, yet the owner didn't hear them walk. No creak on the old floorboards, no sound at all. They asked for the book by name, not the title, but the catalog number. The one he'd written in pencil inside the back cover. No one else would have known it. He said it was sold. They asked for the buyer's name. He didn't take one. Cash sale. That was the end of it, or so he thought. But they didn't leave. Instead, they asked to see every copy. When he told them there was only one, they frowned slow, synchronized frowns, and asked to check his inventory. They didn't flash badges. They didn't threaten. But he stepped aside anyway. He didn't know why. They combed through his back room with clinical precision, pulled every title that even felt related. Old UFO sightings, Cold War mind control programs, declassified government documents. They laid them out like a ritual and bought every single one. Cash, crisp bills, unfolded, sequential. Then came the question that chilled him. Who else saw it? He didn't understand. They clarified. The book, before it was sold. Who else handled it? He laughed nervously and said it wasn't exactly a bestseller. They didn't laugh back. Not even a twitch at the corner of their mouths. He offered to check the security camera footage, but when he went to the back office, the monitor was blank, frozen, time-stamped at the exact minute they walked in. He turned to tell them, but they were already standing in the doorway, as if they'd known where he'd go next. The taller one handed him a card. No name, no number, just a symbol, 3 concentric circles with a black dot in the center. He stared at it too long and got a headache that didn't leave for days. They walked out without another word. That night, the owner flipped the store's closed sign early. He didn't sleep. He just sat behind the counter, staring at the door, wondering who else had read the book, wondering why the men hadn't taken him, and wondering, more than anything, what was inside that book that made them come looking. It was one of those Arizona days when the air shimmered like stretched glass, and the heat pressed down like a smothering hand. The pavement rippled, the parking meters sagged, even the lizards kept to the shade. You don't walk far in a desert town like that unless you have nowhere else to be. Glenn was halfway down an empty sidewalk, nursing a melted bottle of water, when he noticed the figure. It stood perfectly still at the corner across the street, tall, thin, dressed head to toe in black. But what caught his eye, what stuck in his brain, was the umbrella, jet black, wide canopy, held straight above a motionless figure who didn't seem to sweat, didn't squint, didn't move. Glenn blinked against the heat haze, thinking maybe it was some kind of street performer or tourist. But there was no one around to perform for. No camera, no car, and no reason to carry an umbrella when the sky was a flawless sheet of white blue. He crossed the street slowly, not out of courage, but curiosity. That kind of stillness pulls you in. The closer he got, the more wrong it felt. The man, if it was a man, was impossibly pale. Like porcelain, like something that had never seen sunlight. No eyebrows, no visible hair beneath the hat. Lips that looked painted on, eyes so dark they didn't reflect. As Glenn passed, he offered a nervous smile and muttered something dumb. "Hot one today, huh?" The man didn't smile back, didn't speak, but he turned, ever so slightly, just enough to follow Glenn with his head. No footsteps, no sound. Glenn kept walking, heart racing, every instinct screaming not to look back, but he did just once. The figure hadn't moved, still there, still staring. Umbrella, perfectly level. He ducked into a convenience store a block away, grabbed a soda just to have an excuse to stay, asked the cashier, half joking, if he'd seen some guy playing Dracula on Main Street. The cashier looked confused, said no one had walked by all day. Cameras out front weren't working again. Static. Glenn stepped outside and scanned the street. Empty. No umbrella. No black figure. Just shimmering asphalt and the buzz of dead cicadas. That night, he dreamt of a shadow that hovered above him, not touching, just watching. The umbrella now felt more like an eye, something blocking out not the sun, but attention from above. He woke with a taste of ozone in his mouth and the smell of burnt plastic clinging to his sheets. Weeks later, a friend mailed him an article about alleged sightings, tall men with umbrellas seen near contactees, places where power flickered, pets vanished, and people started forgetting details of their own lives. He still walks past that corner sometimes, never the same time of day, never the same direction. But once in a while, when the sky is too clear and the street too quiet, he swears he hears the faint snap of fabric unfolding behind him. And in that moment, he doesn't feel the heat at all, only the cold. You followed the stories, one by one, like dim stars blinking in a dark sky. A van that wasn't there, eyes without lashes, laughter that glitched like a broken tape. They all pointed in the same direction but stopped just short of telling you where. Maybe you felt it too. That strange tightness in your chest when you're alone and something brushes the edge of your thoughts, the way shadows sometimes bend the wrong way. The phone that rings once, then never again. A car idling outside at 3 a.m, the way a face in a crowd looks too smooth, too careful, and then it's gone. You weren't meant to understand it. Not completely. That's not how it works. What you've been given is a trail of fingerprints without hands, a language made of whispers and stares, men in black, or things in black, dressed like people, acting like memory, flickering like television static just behind your thoughts. The reason they don't explain why they only ever warn is because knowing is the first fracture. They don't come to erase everything. Just the part of you that might start pulling at threads, the part that would keep digging, the part that would ask the wrong kind of questions. And now, here you are, at the end. You've heard the patterns, the watchful figures, the missing time, the glint of something metallic just under the skin. You've seen how the world flickers when it gets too close to the truth. How silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a decision made by something older than your language, something colder than logic. So sleep now, not because there's nothing left to learn, but because you've learned enough. Because if you go further, you might start to see them where they haven't yet appeared, in reflections, in dreams, in questions that answer themselves too quickly. Let the stories go quiet. Let the men in black become the things they most fear forgotten, because some truths don't set you free. They watch you, they follow, and if you know too much, they remember.